like to ask you to take your seats. We'll get started. We are a small but mighty crowd today. I'm Barbara McBee, the Executive Director of the Global Center for Health Innovation, and I will be your hostess for the day. So you will see me jumping up and down on the stage and handing off to our panel and to our moderators. To those of you who came in from out of town, I would like to welcome you to Cleveland, the city of champions. To all of you, I would like to welcome you to this exciting Cleveland Healthcare Summit. This summit is co-sponsored by the Global Center for Health Innovation, the facility that you're in. The Global Center for Health Innovation is a one-of-a-kind facility dedicated to healthcare innovation through collaboration. It's also co-sponsored by Brocade Communication Systems. And Brocade is committed to improving the digital foundation that serves, supports, and enables patient care IT systems globally. Our goal today is a shared one, to raise and elevate awareness and understanding around the main pillars of healthcare innovation. And those pillars are access to care, value-based care, IT innovation, and cybersecurity and innovation and interoperability. Throughout the course of the next 5 hours, you're going to hear all about these themes. You're going to hear from some of the most notable voices in the industry. They will talk to you about the challenges as well as the opportunities. We have assembled an excellent group of panelists for you today. Included is Dr. Frank Pape. He is the chairman of Dermatology and Plastic Surgery Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. And you may know him or recognize that name. He co-led the team that in December of 2014 performed the miraculous face transplant on a gentleman who had been severely disfigured in a car accident. Dr. Pape is also a medical device inventor, and he uses quite a few flexible electronics in his practice. So I think we're going to hear some very interesting comments from him. We also have Dr. Rupert Daner. Dr. Daner is the Chief Strategy Officer for Pediatric Specialists in Virginia. She's a former Navy officer and former Chief of Pediatrics at Walter Reed Hospital in Bethesda. She's also a global traveler. She has provided medical services around the world, including the front lines of Afghanistan. So she's going to be able to speak to providing care without the comfort of the IT systems that we have grown accustomed to. And Dr. Peter Tippett is one of the world's foremost authorities on the evolution of healthcare data sharing, and he's also here. He is a former emergency room physician and a pioneer in the area of cybersecurity. He formerly served as the Chief Medical Officer for Verizon, and today he's the CEO of Health Celerate and Chairman of DataMotion. Come on in. Feel free to join us. Good morning. Also on the first panel, we have John Paganini. He's the Manager of Interoperability Initiatives for the HIMSS Innovation Center here at the Global Center on the 4th floor. John has over 35 years of healthcare information systems experience, and he's a respected authority and a sought-after industry spokesperson. That's just the first panel. The second panel will largely focus on the digital layer. That's the bedrock of health IT today. We have nationally recognized experts from Verizon, University of California, San Francisco, and Montefiore Medical Center in New York. I'm sure you're looking forward to all of those discussions, as I am, and I'm sure that today we're all going to take away some very important knowledge about healthcare IT and its role in innovation. Leading the panels, between the panels, there's going to be an on-stage discussion with a special guest, Kelly Cronin, and Dr. David Calower. Kelly, as you may know, is a central figure in U.S. healthcare. She's the director of the Office of Care Transformation in the Office of National Coordinator for Health Information Technology. There was no way I was going to remember that, so I thought I had to write it down. In this role, Kelly is involved in establishing and involving the national agenda for health information technology and health reform in coordination with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. On that note, I would like to direct your attention to the pens and index cards in the middle of your tables. If you would like to address a question to Kelly, please write the question on the card. We will be picking those up shortly after the first panel and getting them to the moderator. It is now my privilege to introduce another very special guest, Cuyahoga County Executive Armond Budish. As you may know, healthcare is the largest profession in Cuyahoga County, with over 120,000 healthcare professionals, 36,000 at the Cleveland Clinic, 25,000 at university hospitals. Given the focus of today's discussion, healthcare IT transformation, I think it's particularly fitting that Mr. Budish be here to kick things off. Mr. Budish. It's live. Okay.
I used to be able to just hop up here, but if I tried that today, I would need healthcare. So I want to welcome all of you to the Healthcare Innovation Capital of America, Cleveland, Ohio. I'm so proud that we can boast the best healthcare anywhere with the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals, Metro Health, St. Vincent. I mean, this is where healthcare innovation happens, right here in the Global Center for Health Innovation, which is a unique institution. This building brings together all of our hospital systems, the many private companies that are leading healthcare innovation throughout Cuyahoga County and the world. Companies like General Electric and Siemens and Johnson Controls and many other. All you have to do is go out and look up to see the signs. This is where healthcare innovation happens because we have the collaboration and interactivity here. When it comes to healthcare information transformation, especially in this digital era, we lead the way. It was mentioned HIMSS, John Paganini you'll hear from. HIMSS has the entire fourth floor of this building, and I encourage you to visit. HIMSS has located its National Innovation Center here, and every year HIMSS hosts such nationally important events as the Connectathon and the Hackathon, both of which are creating progress in the new worlds of healthcare information and technology and interoperability. And there's lots more great things happening in Cleveland in the healthcare innovation and transformation areas. We have the Harrington Institute, Harrington Discovery Institute here, which is connected to university hospitals, which supports breakthrough research, development, and commercialization of advanced discoveries. Just go on the website, and it's exciting to see what is happening out of Harrington. And another real exciting example is the exciting new combination of Explorus, which has tens of millions of patient records, with IBM Watson and their partnership with the Cleveland Clinic. They will have a new building to house the hundreds of new jobs that we'll have here in Cleveland in this area. That building's right next to the Cleveland Clinic's exciting innovation center. And I believe that that can be really the future of medicine and healthcare coming right out of that combination. With telemedicine, what it is today, and the ability to use a supercomputer, you know, the Watson computer that won Jeopardy, you can, diagnose anything in seconds, basically, given that combination. So it's very exciting what's going on here. This is the place to be for healthcare innovation and transformation, and I know you're going to have a wonderful conference. So thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Mr. Budish. Does anybody know what week this is? Keep going. Health IT Week. That's right, Health IT Week. Okay, so it's particularly fitting to be here today for Health IT Week. Before we go any further, I would like to ask that you put your phones on mute. We have a lot of exciting information, and we want to make sure everybody gets it. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's panel sessions, Haley Sweetland Edwards. Haley is a correspondent with Time Magazine in Washington, D.C., and she writes frequently about healthcare, the healthcare industry. Prior to joining Time, she was a foreign correspondent in Yemen and the Soviet Union. As you might expect, given her D.C. base and Time's expansive global views, a lot of her work focuses on national policy. So that covers a lot of ground, including cybersecurity. So I'm sure you're going to hear quite a bit about that, as well as other topical issues that go to the heart of healthcare transformation. Haley?
Hi, and thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. You're jumping.
I'm not going to jump.
It actually occurred to me that I should jump.
We all jumped.
Yeah, I'm not going to go up that.
Yeah. This is our first panel here, and our goal for the next hour is to take a look at the implications of care in the palm of your hand. And one of the things that I think makes this so interesting right now, and we were talking about this before, is we're in this incredible inflection point where I could go online right now and see how many steps my dad has taken today with his Fitbit. And at the same time, when I go to the doctor, I'm still filling out my date of birth and Social Security on paper on a clipboard for the third time. So where are we? What are we doing? We live in 2016. What are the promises and perils of this technology we're looking at? So that is the goal of this panel. And I'm going to start on your far left with Dr. Please, everyone, just please introduce yourselves and give a maybe 3-minute introduction of who you are and what you'll be talking about.
Sure. My name's Frank Pepe, Dr. Frank Pepe. I'm at the Cleveland Clinic. I am one of the institute chairs there, in particular dermatology and plastic surgery. And my background was in biomedical engineering, and actually the same time Peter Tippett, we've crossed paths many times before around the Cleveland area, and then trained in otolaryngology and then in plastic surgery and craniofacial surgery. And I've been involved a lot with innovation, with some peer review committees, commercialization council committees at the Cleveland Clinic, involved with flexible electronics in healthcare, in particular with a group called NextFlex, one of the centers of that, and how do you monitor patients inside and outside the hospital, and how do you increase value in healthcare by utilizing flexible electronics, and involved with a couple startups that we can talk about later.
Wonderful. Next.
I'm Dr. Rupa Daner. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for a small group called Pediatric Specialists of Virginia. Our parents aren't small, though. Our parents are the Inova Medical Group in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and the Children's National Health System, which is the premier pediatric system in Washington, D.C. And they're probably the two only large disparate health systems that have come together to form a completely separate health entity called Pediatric Specialists of Virginia. But my background, I've only been doing that for a year. I've only been out of the military for a year. I spent 17 years in the Navy training to be an anesthesiologist, which is where my clinical background is, and a subspecialty in pediatric anesthesia. I took this sort of training overseas to Afghanistan with the Marine Corps and worked a lot without any technology whatsoever, which to me felt like I'd had a limb amputated, which is an unfair way of saying things. It's very, very serious to have a limb amputated, but you feel like all of the information that you've gathered, all of the crutches and the tools that you have at your disposal are gone when you're in a place like that. We've also done some medical missions to third world countries like the Dominican Republic, where you have very similar situations. The information and the standard of care that you might be used to providing, you may have to provide in a different way. So I'm very excited to be here because hearing everyone's perspectives and their future thought processes makes me realize that we can continue to provide this care and use of all our knowledge in places where we couldn't before.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I'm Peter Tippett. I got an MD PhD here at Case Western Reserve. And in the middle of the MD PhD thing, I got hooked on the PC revolution and got involved and sort of sucked in or whatever to that whole world. Did some medical remote diagnostic thing for remote third world people to make people with 3 months of training sort of act like a doctor with the help of a thing like a sewing machine and a solar cell. But I got involved and created the first antivirus product here in Cleveland, which eventually became Norton Antivirus. And was fully into the PC industry. I funded that by being an ER doctor working nights, and both here and in California. And then went on to do 2 or 3 other companies, both in cybersecurity and health information technology. Wound up back in Washington, D.C., where I got invited to join the White House. I saw an ONC person, and I don't know where you went. And the first office of the national coordinator for the those who need the DC translation, the health czar was David Brailer, the first one, and the first committee that helped fix this problem was Bush, who sort of said, look, we can only beat up the pharmaceuticals and the insurance companies so much. Isn't there something we can do with information technology to bend the cost curve and improve quality and care and so on? And that first committee came together with a presidential charge. It doesn't sound like a lot, but a presidential charge gives you subpoena power and clearances to look at the data in secret places and get people to tell you what's really going on, and a 2-year time frame to dig under the surface and figure out what really was working and what wasn't working. And that led to other things which eventually became something called meaningful use, which was the government program to drive clinicians and hospitals to use electronic medical records, to make meaningful use of electronic health records, which cost a lot of money and succeeded at getting everybody to use electronic health records. Sure. During that last period, I was the chief medical officer at Verizon. I had sold a company to Verizon and got involved with Verizon's 350,000 healthcare customers, only a couple of businesses who were involved in that, and tried to figure out from that perspective, with a lot of mass and a lot of customers and a worldwide stance, how we could try and use a big footprint to drive this transformation forward. Because it's clear, and you started this, and you're right, it's clear, it's obvious to everyone that if only we actually made good use of electronic health records, and if only we shared them. I'll summarize the result of the PTAC, the first presidential. We said effectively that if only people shared and used medical records, as well as the financial industry shares financial records, if that's all we did, 3 things would happen. 1, everybody would be wildly healthier, right? They'd live longer. In medicine, we call this quality. So the quality would go up. Number 2, at the time, we thought there'd be about a $70 billion a year savings. This is 13 years ago, was our prediction. Since then, the national, the NIH groups that look at this financial stuff have added a 0 to that. They think it's more like $700 billion a year of savings. Not my study. This is NIH, Institute of Medicine, serious people who do this stuff. More than all of the arguments in Congress about anything that needs to be paid for could be saved just so. And we'd have an entirely new kind of science. So here's the deal. We'd save a ton of money, everybody'd be healthier, and we'd have an entirely new kind of science. But other than that, it's probably not worth doing.
Good start. Hi, I'm John Paganini, and I'm a big believer in meaningful use and the value it has brought to the industry as far as taking us into this electronic world. It was definitely a fantastic impetus, if you will, to bring those people who are not yet thinking about being electronic, but know they needed to, and there was some financial, motivation, if you will, to do that. And because of that, things have happened now where we have access to data that we never had before. Hence, precision medicine, population health, all of these initiatives are now becoming real because finally we have access to the data. And the data is now electronic format where we can start asking some fantastic questions on that. So anyway, I work for HIMSS up here, as was said before, at the HIMSS Innovation Center. My background is I've had a couple startups heavy in digital imaging, radiology information systems, pathology, doing interesting things with digital microscopy and tuberculosis in South Africa. Did some nice consulting at the Cleveland Clinic, worked on IBM Watson and some other great projects. So I have a background in, heavy background in interoperability, if you will. I've been involved in an organization called Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise since it started back in 1999. So before that, I wrote an electronic medical record back in 1995, but I never quit my day job, and I'm still disappointed about that because it was a little bit before its time. But I learned what the requirements were for general practices and collecting that information way early. And one of the challenges we had back then was that the paper was still present, and that problem is still present, but they've figured out how to inject paper into the electronic medical records since then. So anyway, that's I've been in IT for a long time. Half of it's been healthcare related.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I think each of you undersold yourself in some way or another, considering I've been reading your bios online. We have just extraordinary talent up here. I really want to get to a lot of electronic medical records because I know that there's a lot of interest on the stage about that. But before we get there, I wanted to touch on devices. And beginning with Dr. Frank Pepe, you have done a lot of work with using radio frequency devices in treating cluster headaches. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and then going forward, where do you see the innovation and the progress happening in that field?
Well, I've been involved with, again, this flexible electronics, in particular with cluster headaches and migraine headaches, and those are implantable devices, and we're working with our next stage. We're actually thanking the hackathon that we had here at the HIMSS Center from last year. We've developed another implantable device that we're currently in animals testing and doing some early in-human testing for sleep apnea. I think flexible electronics are really the key to the future. The growth of that is mostly, as you know, as we all have our Fitbit on and our Garmin on, is mostly in sports right now. But it should grow in double digits very quickly in the healthcare field. So those flexible electronics, as they apply to healthcare, and have to be userability. Most people that use their watch, smartwatch, whatever, really only use it for counting steps or something like that. But that and the usability of flexible electronics in the future are beginning to change, in the sense you can have a transparent patch on you or an embedded electronic on you that will actually report out in real time. The question with that, the future to that, is not, the technology is there. Mm-hmm. It's really the security of that data, which I'd love to get Peter's opinion about that, in addition to how do you crunch that data? And do you use AI for that, and then who's responsible for the decision making after the crunching of that data? It's still going to lie on the surgeon or the healthcare provider. So I think those are all questions that in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to have to iron out. But I think the technology is here. It's all the other things that surround the technology that we have to sort of plow through, such as policy. Is CMS going to incentivize us to use it more, like they're doing with healthcare medical records? We're not quite there yet, but we're on the verge.
That's actually, would love to hear Peter respond to that. I mean, when we're talking specifically about devices, what are the challenges from a cybersecurity perspective, also from meeting FDA requirements, meeting HIPAA requirements? What are we looking at? How long is
this conference?
Yeah, in 3 minutes or less.
Devices, cybersecurity is everybody's worry, and it's everybody's never mind. right? If you pit interoperability or usability against security, usability trumps security every time. If people actually get value out of it, they'll just get going, right? And although we all poo-poo that, the fact is that putting it in first gear and putting your foot on the gas gets you somewhere, right? And so if people are actually given things that add productivity, reduce costs, make their lives better, whatever it is, they will generally use it. At least most of them will. And it scares the heck out of all of us, you know. But in fact, I mean, I remember going to Congress showing them the internet the first time. And, you know, we brought in a T1 line. It was such an amazing thing into Congress, and sat there and did a hearing. And this was O.J. Simpson time, just in case you need to get the dates. I was explaining, you know, what was possible with this new thing called the internet. And I had to use an example of privacy, and there's only two people I could imagine exposing the privacy on. One was me, and the other one was OJ, because he was already exposed, right? And so I said, watch this, and I logged into something for $3 and looked at my zip code in my house and figured out within 5% what I got paid, and looked at how many chimneys I had and how many bathrooms I had, and all that stuff was instantly available. And this is 20-something years ago, right? And then I did the same for OJ, just what's online. At that time, you might have to pay $4 or $5. Now you don't. And it floored everybody. It was like everybody got really afraid. The big difference was if you were 20, even then, it was like, who cares? And if you were 40 then, it was, oh my God. And we have that same exact issue. So we do need to do cybersecurity and privacy. We need to get it right. And at some level, we've got to get ahead of the curve on some of this stuff. But the transformation is going to happen whether we get it right or not, driven by people who don't care. You know,
that's true. There's a couple of trains of thought on that, though. Just some recent readings I saw that if people think that their device is challenged from a cybersecurity and it's not secure, that even though the interface may be very simple, they may not use it because they're afraid of using that device, even though it's working, it's providing them with the information they need and the access, but there is a cybersecurity fear.
You give them Snapchat, and what do they do?
Yeah, exactly. So there are tools out there, right? But it's an interesting phenomenon because you would think, my phones are so easy to use, I can access it, I'm not going to worry about cybersecurity. Somebody else is worrying about that. But if I have to worry about it, then maybe I'm not going to use that. So it's a new awareness that the world is having.
So medical devices in particular, to your exact point, have real, there's IV pumps all over the country that have an Ethernet port in the back that haven't been updated in 15 years.
Big fear.
And if you could get to it, which you can electronically, a hacker could own it, and theoretically they could change the dose of morphine and kill somebody or whatever, right? And the theoretical, wouldn't it be horrible if problems are abound, they're everywhere. And theoretically, they're mostly true. On the other hand, those things don't actually happen.
But they could.
So we have to really balance your car could be hit by a meteor and you would die also. And it doesn't have a meteor protector, and I think we ought to petition Volkswagen to forget about the diesel thing and fix the meteor problem.
Peter, that being said, I just read just the other day that 88% of healthcare IT systems have been hacked one way or the other. 88%.
Yeah.
So it is happening.
Yeah.
And what data is garnered, who knows?
And they're the most picked on as well.
A lot of the data breaches is just visual data breaches, just walking by and seeing what a nurse is doing, and you're picking up. And that got, as you've heard from the NFL, that was involved with several large lawsuits in addition to government suits that are out there now. So to me, one of the big barriers to this implementation is userability, but it's security.
Yeah. So Dr. Rubendaner, you actually are on the front lines, or have been. You spent 19 years in military hospitals. Are you hearing a lot of fear from patients about the cybersecurity issues? Or?
From patients, I don't hear security issues. From patients, I hear, what is this really going to do for me? And, you know, I think about all this data that we're getting, and I love data. I want to use data in everything that I do. But at the end of the day, how is it making me better? You know, when you look at the population health, we can understand that. We can say, I have diabetes data, and if I take this whole group of people and I figure out what their hemoglobin A1Cs are, I can figure out the ones who are not in control and figure out how to make a system to make a whole bunch of people better. But that one person, the person I'm standing in front of and saying, hi, I'm your doctor, they don't care about that population data. They just care about how they can feel better. And how are these devices changing their behavior? And so much of their behavior is what they eat, how they exercise, how they sleep, how they live their lives. How is the technology going to make them better?
And that's where the device things come in. Right. You know, to the extent that this Fitbit doesn't just track stuff and make you wonder, you know, after you wear a Fitbit for a week, you realize that you either do or don't do more than 10,000 steps on an average day. And if you do, you say, well, I don't need this.
Yeah.
Right?
And then
if you don't, you say, God, I can't imagine how I could get up to 10,000 steps a day because I'm only at 3,000. Oh my God. You know, and the people you just talked about who are chronically ill and have 5 diseases and all that get 300 steps a day, and getting them to 1,000 would be a big breakthrough, right? But what's transformational about this is the nudges, right? Is the ability for your daughter to nudge you, right? The ability for people who you actually care about. Not the people, not some machine somewhere, not something else, but your true social network. Not the Facebook, you know, rack up points of likes, but the 12 people that you actually want to talk to, and how you disappoint them, or how they might say, Mom, come on, for God's sakes, you know, come with me and let's go get your hair done. How can you do that more electronically? And how can you make those nudges and those personal interactions really escalate for the people who are, you know, most of those, half of people over 65, half have never used social media.
Right.
More than half of people with diabetes and any other chronic disease over 65 have never used a smartphone and couldn't if they wanted to. Right? You can't involve these people. They can't swipe and pinch and zoom and click and menu, and that's not in the cards. It's like learning to ride a bike when you're 80. It's not, if you've not already learned, you're not going to. So how do we get these people involved in the, not just simplicity? The iPhone isn't simple enough. It's got to be wildly simpler than that.
Right. You know, Peter, you're right on. I don't call this monitoring technology. This is behavioral technology. Right. And I say that we did a beta on just a simple device that would be connected to hand washing, which is very important in healthcare for disease control. And we found out just behaviorally the Hawthorne effect, which I call the virtual Hawthorne effect of we're watching you, you know, little brother is watching you, you know, increased a bump where everybody watched their hand with it before they walked in a patient's room. And that kind of went away over a period of time like any Hawthorne effect. But what we found was interesting is that when you washed your hands, if you're in an outpatient setting, you would wash your hands because you knew the patient was seeing you as you came into the room, but you never washed it going out, which you should do. On the other hand, if it was an inpatient in a hospital, the healthcare giver always washed more leaving the room because, boy, this patient's sick. I don't want to get what they got. So they washed more leaving the room. So you can actually, in this psychosocial sort of study, you can understand the behavior of individuals, but then how do you modify that? As you said, especially in an elderly individual that doesn't use technology that much. To me, it's behavioral technology without getting into the big brother sense of it.
Yeah. And
that is another trick.
Technology can help change those workflows. For example, that sensor, if the doctor went to talk to the next patient, that sensor would alert them that they had not yet washed their hands. Just as an example of how apps can really change individuals' behavior in the clinical setting, you know, and the efficiency of that and the benefits.
But I can tell you the nurses and the doctors were very reticent about using it because it's Big Brother.
Yeah.
It was Big Brother. And we had to convince them. And after a period of time, after a month or so, it was part of their badge system. They became used to it over a period of time. But you had to get over that hump first, that somebody's watching you.
That same type of cultural change, but getting back to cybersecurity, has to be built into the organization's thinking and mindset. Even the kids, you know, have to think about the fact that cybersecurity is very important in protecting all that information. So once it's built into the culture, then you can kind of move forward with a general mindset that this is important and we need to protect the data at many different levels.
And then I also think you have to incentivize. You know, we all have selective incentives in our life, and you know, meaningful use was a big incentive policy by the government. And I think as we get into flexible electronics and all the data and what we do with that data, we have to incentivize it, either originally through CMS and policy through the government, or as now, as Peter and I were talking about before, third-party payers are picking that up.
In the interest of creating a little friction, we didn't have to incentivize people to use email.
I was thinking that exactly.
We didn't have to incentivize people to use Word or Excel. We didn't have to incentivize people to use Google and look things up. It just had its obvious value, right? And to the extent that people provide systems that have obvious value and those systems work, then people will use them. Now, the trick is getting across the hurdle to cover all of the, you know, it's got to be legal, safe, secure, compliant, it's got to meet the regulations, got to integrate, it's got to do a zillion other things.
To the user.
Nobody's saying that's easy, but to the extent that people get something across that chasm and it provides direct value, I don't know, a doctor would actually use it because they want to, not because somebody was breaking their arm behind their back.
Add to the friction, to add to the friction, there is an incentive using email. It makes things easier and simpler for you.
Right.
You know, I call it the passive-aggressive phone call, you know. So, you know, here, you got my email, you didn't act on it, you know, what's wrong with you, you know? I sent it to you a month ago, didn't you read it?
Yeah.
And then you know, I'm sure, Peter, you get 1,000 emails right now. So there is an incentive to use it. Now, I disagree with you, you know. On the other hand, if I'm going to see a patient, a virtual visit, you know, how am I going to get paid for it? I am not a lawyer where I can bill time, you know, and who's going to pay me for it? Is it CMS? Now, you know, right now, as you know, you get paid for if you're a prisoner having health care or in a rural setting, and some third-party payers are beginning to get onto that. But there's going to be a critical point where you're going to have an internal setup. Now, at the Cleveland Clinic, we're doing that anyhow because we think with population health, you know, part of the value equation is cost. It's probably the most because obviously we give great quality of care, right? So it can't be quality. So we're going to have to drive the cost of the denominator. And so the only way to drive that is to do what you can in the period of time that you have as much as possible. And that's why I think virtual, you know, healthcare may come involved, but still, Peter, there's still an incentive behind that.
Yeah.
Well, and Dr. Mr. Paganini? Doctor.
Yep, Paganini.
Paganini.
Not a doctor. I think I'm the only doctor not on
Doctor,
stage,
I'm just doctor at the tip of my tongue. You're in the you know, in these trade shows a lot. You're seeing a lot of this innovation come up. Are you seeing companies police themselves when it comes to these cybersecurity issues?
Yeah, the importance of it. That's an interesting question. For example, you mentioned the Cleveland Medical Hackathon that we're having next month. This year, for the first time, we are having a HIM speaker, an expert on privacy and security, actually speak before the systems are created and built, as well as interoperability. So we are going to kind of help set the stage. If you're going to build something really interesting in your concept, these are things you might want to think about along your design stages. Let's think about cybersecurity while you're doing that. Let's think about, you've got this great device. It has to talk to the mothership. How do you do that? Well, there's interoperability, there's standards, ways of doing that. So I think so. And even at the HIM show, we have something called the Interoperability Showcase, where people can see how systems are connecting to each other and what are those standards. So we try to get the message out as much as possible.
So there's, of course, that constant push and pull between private sector and government of you know, self-policing versus overt regulation when it comes to health technologies and health devices, you know, and anything that monitors people's health, or as Peter was saying, you know, anything that allows
access to it.
Yeah. Exactly. Someone's daughter, someone's neighbor, someone's friend, helping them. We get into huge issues of danger and privacy, and you know, how do we, on this stage, what's the thought there? Should this be? Is there enough incentive from the companies themselves who are developing these products, and the healthcare providers that are developing them, to keep their patients safe, or should there be some external national benchmarks? Peter, you've thought about it a lot.
So the national, you know, HIPAA is it just passed its 20th anniversary. So HIPAA was born 20 years ago. The guy who wrote HIPAA is a doctor, Bill Braithwaite, and he is called Dr. HIPAA. He works for me. And Dr. Braithwaite and I were both bright-eyed, excited people about this, because the P in HIPAA, everybody sort of assumes it's privacy, but actually the P in HIPAA is for portability. HIPAA was designed to get people to share data more, make it more portable, and incentivize people to do that by making it easy to understand and deal with the privacy and security issues, right? The purpose of HIPAA was not to regulate more. The purpose of HIPAA was to tell people how just do the basics in privacy and security, and the basics are pretty simple. A self-certification, there's no other outside standard. Just here's how to do the basics. Think about these 3 or 4 things seriously, do a little risk assessment. Here's a couple of basic privacy rules. Get that done, you'll be fine. Don't worry about the rest. Make sure the patients give permission. Make sure if any clinician is sharing information with any other clinician, they have an agreement between them to take good care of that personal record. You know, a couple of basics, real basic things. The rest of it is up to whoever's running the system. Make sure they do a risk assessment and then do whatever it says. Turned out that telling people to do whatever seems right, given your own risk assessment, is too much latitude. It freaked out the whole community. It made it harder. The parallel standard is called PCI, the payment card industry standard. They said, here's 12 explicit rules. Do A, B, C through 12, right? If you want detail, dig into 1A, 1B, 1C, and see exactly what we mean by that. We've trained 1,000 people called QSAs who will be certification people. If they say you're good against these 12 things, you're good, right? That's the deal. If you wonder if I've got a question, pay somebody. There's 1,000 of them in the country. Ask them, and they'll tell you what's good. On the HIPAA side, it was like, go figure it out yourself. Document what you figured out. Get on with it. You'll be fine. Well, they called a lawyer. The lawyer said, they said, well, I don't know, what question should we ask? And the lawyer said, gosh, I better think of a lot of questions because, you know, I get paid for that. And let's go find a zillion things. And then they said, that lawyer, when they talked to the other people across town, they said, we're not doing those things, we're doing these things. They said, oh my God, is that what HIPAA means? We better call somebody else. Let's talk to your guy. And your guy had a different list of things that it meant to be safe, secure, and compliant because the rule was intentionally loose. It was intentionally self-certified. Turned out it flipped out the whole industry, and we haven't recovered from it. All of a sudden, it's a worse problem. It isn't easy enough because everybody made it harder on themselves.
Dr. Daner, I see you nodding.
I'm nodding because I'm hearing everything that you both are saying, what you all said, and I think all these great intentions have turned out from the user end of it to be absolutely horrible. And you're talking to somebody here, you probably don't know this about me, but I have the brand new everything. I got the iPhone 7 the day it came out. I have my Apple Watch 2 on pre-order and my one, you know, here. I have everything. And I hate the electronic medical record. And I said that out loud. And I hate it because it made my life harder. HIPAA makes my life harder. And I know it says portability because I read it and they sign the thing and I don't understand. It says very unportable. In fact, it makes all of my data stay in one place. I can't take it anywhere. I can't interact with this electronic medical record because I'm not talking to someone in their eyes anymore. I'm looking at all of you, but really I should be typing because I have to put it all in this electronic medical record, which I can't read anywhere else but in my hospital or in my special connection that my hospital has to my house because everything's so insecure. And it's exactly what you're saying. There's too many ways to interpret this rule that all of us think is just kind of common sense. And common sense doesn't work when you take it to the law firm or you take it to the policy. You need very specific rules because if I can follow your specific rules, then I'll do it and it'll be fine. I can just close my eyes. And that's what our patients want. That's what the doctors want. That's what we all want, is to be able to do for everybody your information is yours. You own it. You should be able to take it wherever you go. I should be able to go from Mayo to the Cleveland Clinic and get my great, fantastic quality of care, but not have to worry about all that stuff someone did over there talking to the stuff someone did over here. And to me, I don't want to see the technology. I want it to be like the camera guy. We don't even know he's there. To be underneath everything else.
There needs to be some policy of standardization. I agree with you 100%. And I think what Peter and the sort of inventors of HIPAA started with is not what it is now. I mean, we've made a business for lawyers, you know, a whole new market for lawyers. And I do agree with you about the electronic medical record. You know, we're trying to increase the value of each healthcare giver by having them work to the top of their licensure. And working from an Epic standpoint, or pick any medical, you end up being a scribe a lot of times. And you're not looking at the patient's eyes and really interacting socially with that patient, because they put a lot of trust in you. And how can you put trust in somebody who's, what did you say? Oh, let me go back and forth. There's this relationship that needs to be developed very quickly, and a trust in that relationship that's not there. Okay, you end up being robotic-like, I think. So how do you do that? How do you decrease the clicks? There's companies I know that out of India where you wear Google glasses, and it records everything, and that recording is going somewhere. A scribe who's seeing, I'm talking about HIPAA violations, seeing what's going on and actually scribing in real time, and that goes fed back.
And that's where that's what you want. What you want is for the system to capture what's important about your interaction with your patients, just like that guy's capturing this meeting, right? And if it needs to be converted to text so it can be searchable, so be it. Let that happen, right? But all of that should be safe, secure, and compliant. And making the Google Glasses do that and be compliant isn't terribly hard. Verizon, when I was there, had whole programs to do that. My new companies are all about saying, don't worry about the HIPAA problem, just use this channel and that thing and let somebody else take care of it, right? So if you had those models, and these are coming. I mean, just like every other industry, the problems are addressed by people who say, I'll solve that for you. Right. Let me just take that off your plate. Don't worry about it. Let me worry about it. And you get on with the Google Glasses to the scribe in the background, and we'll make that work and so magically make that.
Does that technology currently exist? Are you seeing that in trade shows?
There are companies that have
There are
right
companies
now.
that can ride on that.
Right.
So you build your invention, and that's the other side of it. Maybe you don't have to build it into your solution. There's other companies that will provide that layer, if you will, of cybersecurity.
So the cybersecurity side, but does this sort of ideal that you're discussing from interacting with patients directly, where it is there's a technology that gathers the important information and puts it into one place, or are we still behind in the technology there?
Isn't that Watson?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that what Watson's supposed to do?
We're behind, I think, in policy for standardization. That has to come from the government.
But there are a lot of options
first.
out there.
Right.
Certainly voice recognition has been around for a while, and now we're moving to Google Glasses and other ways of capturing that information.
But
and
we still have to standardize it, as he said, in sharing that data. We haven't done that.
Yeah, there is technology. I don't know if you've been looking into blockchain technology and how that's working. That is a very interesting architecture, if you will. And if we were to, blockchain is no one owns it. So there's no company or a business or organization that really owns the network in a sense. And blockchain is transactions. It's a place to enter, store, track, audit transactions. And it's built into like a net or mesh network. It's not hub and spoke traditional. It's all synchronized across all these different systems. With that, and it's called the distributed ledger technology. With that, if you imagine the impact to healthcare it could have, let's say that all of your patient records from your devices, you are the patients. And that was one of the things that we really didn't talk about. We talked about how the electronic medical record is challenging, but there's a patient who can and should be contributing to that medical record as well. So let's say the patient is on this blockchain and their wearable devices are feeding that. Then let's say all the different EMRs and systems, multiple hospitals, are also feeding that same patient record. Let's add in biosurveillance data, let's add in social, environmental data, and let's add in all this information contributing to one holistic record about that patient. And the patient decides, in a sense, who has access to that information. So it's secure, it's encrypted, the integrity of that data is very good, and everybody has contributed to it. And that is really an interesting way that we can think about that. And of course, it could always roll up to population health for analytics and research. So that gets very interesting. So I think I'm just bringing that up as some interest, since this is a health IT forum, and I'm the only one without the doctor on here. I just thought I'd throw in some IT
so
for that.
So that point,
it's an interesting future when you think about what that could be.
Yeah,
And
it's going to be great. And this is part of our problem. We conceive see what's going to be great.
Yeah.
And there's precious few places where it actually is great. You're going to, on your second panel, you'll see some examples in sort of pockets that are bigger than a county where where parts of this work at scale.
Sure.
But that's rare. You know, there isn't any sort of, in demonstration sessions, people have ways to collect data more automatically and do something with it. But those are demonstration projects. Nobody's doing anything like that at scale, even at the scale of a single hospital, right? But these, you know, so we're in this big transition period. I actually think, and maybe I'll throw another wrench in this whole thing, that the doctor-patient relationship is roughly going to go away, right? How many of you go to a travel agent? We quit doing that. Why did we quit doing that? It's not like the doctor and the travel agent are equivalent, but it's just an example, right? We made it easy enough to figure out what the room looks like and what the flight is like and to find a way to get there and to check out all the options that most of us just do it ourselves, right? And about 2/3 of doctor-patient interactions are pure consultation. They aren't procedures. I mean, if you need to get your stitches or your knee done or whatever it is, that clearly you've got to be live with somebody personal. And there are times when the physical exam is very important and all the rest. But 2/3 of our interactions with our clinicians are, should I take more or less of this pill? I've got this problem, I've got an itch, should I do this or that? I seem to have it's not working as well. And well, why don't we try changing this pill to that pill? You don't need to be in front of the doctor to have that discussion, right? And so we're going to wind up getting, or what's this bump? We just talked about let me see if I can remember this. We talked about the melanoma scan, right? You have your iPhone, just take a picture of your back, do it again 6 months later, and any change that might be melanoma is figured out by an app. Right? Well, this isn't the doctor looking at each bump saying that either looks or doesn't look like a melanoma, right? This is an app. So I think if we fast forward 10 years, we will have both doctor-patient relationships and patient-brand relationships. So the Cleveland Clinic, I'm not there, I trained there, but I've been a long time ago. I'm not representing them, but if I were them, I'd be thinking there's going to be a brand that people want trust with, right? And I'm going to provide this brand, and part of that will be doctor-patient close relation, very highly personal things and procedures and whatnot. But part of it will be, just ask me about the bump. It'll be purely virtual, right? And I'll get the answer to you in a minute and a half. Not schedule an appointment, have a meeting, do all the rest of this stuff, or this isn't working. Is there a better way to do it? Yeah, why don't we try that? That's what most of medicine is about.
So I want to hear actually Dr. Daner's perspective on that. I mean, do you see that your interactions being obsolete within 10 years? And if so, is that actually a good thing, or is that a threat to the culture?
Well, he didn't say obsolete. He just said it. I feel like I agree with everything he says, because he's not really saying obsolete. He's saying it's going to change dramatically. And I'm okay with changing dramatically. I don't think that you can ever take away humanity from humans. We're going to be interacting with each other. That's the point of technology, isn't to eliminate that. It's to make it as good as it can possibly be. And there's going to be times where you're going to have to touch somebody. You have to do an operation, but not just doing an operation. Sometimes people just want to be with other people. And part of their healing is being with a physician who cares about them, somebody who cares. That's not going to go away. But there's a lot of people out there who are very, very busy, who just need a refill on their birth control pills. And that is a large number of people, and they cost dollars every single time, and it costs you time every single time you drive and you park, and you don't want to do that. That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about making something obsolete. Anesthesia had something like this recently. There's some machine, I'm not going to say the name of it.
Oh, I remember, yes.
Some machine that apparently could replace me, and I was supposed to be worried. And I'm like, I don't think I can be worried, because you can't really replace the type of interaction a person is going to have, the moment-to-moment decision-making. Not yet. Maybe Watson will be able to one day, but even Watson can't do that right now. So I embrace this technology. I want it to make my life easier. I want it to make my patient's life better, but I don't want it to have an opposite effect like HIPAA or EMR. I want it to be a really useful thing.
I think IT does that in all domains, in retail and where you name the domain, IT has improved the automation has actually added to the level of relationship you will now have with your patients. So that'll improve. You'll have more time thanks to the efficiencies, and the outcomes will be better as well along the same terms.
So we're in that awkward teenage place right now.
You know, I agree with all the above, but there's still going to be an accountability factor. Okay, when you're talking about retail and finance and everything, that accountability is very diffuse. It's J.P. Morgan, it's this or that. But when you talk about healthcare, it's doctor. You know, it is a single accountability. So there's this legal factor with that. Where does the buck stop? You know, okay, Watson diagnosed me as having lymphoma, but I ended up having this. Okay, who's accountable for that diagnostic factor that was wrong? It's got to find a way, which it hasn't yet. And it's so right now, you know, you being the captain of the ship in the OR, you know, it lies with you. But that's going to change.
You know, you actually got to both of you to some really important points. The accountability, the other big change, and everybody thinks this is going to happen, but nobody knows how it's going to happen, is the shift from electronic medical records to personal health records. The shift from hospital owning my medical record to me owning my medical record. The things we've done around making this happen turn out that 70, 80, 90+% of people actually don't want to own their medical record. They don't care, right? Well, when you dig deeper into that, it's like looking under the poles. And when you dig deeper into that, they actually do care. It's just too hard, right? The way we've given them the question isn't, would you, we ask them, would you like to do this gnarly work yourself? And the answer is no. Right? But if it was, instead of digging around for that vaccination card that you know your kid has somewhere in some drawer, it's probably yellow and I know it's brown, do they either need that vaccine again or not? I don't know what vaccine they got. Do you know what, honestly, do you know? But the card exists. You know, it's getting edges on it and all that. You might be able to find, if that could just be easy to find and it was always available, even if it was just a photo of the card from 10 years ago and somehow it got changed to something easier and you could answer that question or you could find the answer quickly and you could own it, or what happened, or the clipboard you filled out. Wouldn't it be easy if I didn't have to do that? Everybody wants to say, let's make those problems easier. And in the end, the shift is going to be towards the patient having control over that. And this whole notion of, is it okay to share data with so-and-so, and what about the Fitbit data, and who's got the right, we had a discussion before we got up here of the special teen problem, where if you're in a certain range, not quite 18, but over, you know, what is it, 13, 14, you have rights that you can keep your parents from knowing about certain things. Well, gosh, there's a new set of regs that are in between, and the kid doesn't have the right to vote or the right to make other decisions, or the, you know, how do you give them that? And so all this permissioning problem becomes a real problem. And if you think about data stored in one place and giving different permissions to the parents than to different doctors, I'm rambling, but I trained here in Cleveland, and Bob Hope was one of my patients a long time ago. At the time, everything was on paper, and at the time, everybody wanted to look at Bob Hope's medical record. Anybody with a doctor could walk up to the medical records office and say, I'm Dr. Tippett. Let me see Bob Hope's record, and they would give it to me. Whether I was Bob Hope's actual doctor or not didn't matter, right? That same exact problem happens in the electronic medical record. You have to be able to give whoever thinks they need access to the record access to it. The difference is you can track it and you can tell people, if you do stuff like that, I'll fire you or we'll throw you out or whatever. So this accountability needs to happen, but there's no possible way to write enough rules to give the Meals on Wheels person the right access to know just which car to drive it to and which house to give it to and whether to not make sure there's no peanut butter there. There's a little allergy question there that you really want the Meals on Wheels person to know, right? But you don't want them to have the whole medical record. There's not a possible way you could write all those rules into any central system versus anybody who might not get at it. But you could easily ask the patient, is it okay if the Meals on Wheels person gets that?
To get access.
So in the end, the permissions are going to go to the patient, because that's where it goes anyway. And the records will go there. And this boils down to what technology people call identity problem. Knowing who the patient really is, knowing what she really wants, and being able to sort of capture that and keep it available so that these other systems could say, now what did Betty want again?
Right.
And Betty could answer the question, but it all happens electronically on the fly because she answered it once 3 months ago.
Well, I hope the user interface is easier than the Facebook privacy settings right now, where I have no idea what anybody knows on those things.
That's intentionally obscured.
Exactly, and then you get into problems with that as well, because of course there are people in the healthcare industry that want to market to patients with certain allergies or certain diseases, and you want that to remain private as well. I want to open it up to questions from the audience in about 5 minutes or so. So if anyone has those, reach for those cards and fill them out, and we'll have someone come pick them up. Another top line question that I had, and we sort of touched on this earlier, but what comes first? Like with the chicken and the egg question, do we need the standardization guidelines on how these devices and how these technologies or how these electronic medical records are going to talk to each other, and how they're going to remain secure first, or do we need the technology first?
You're saying innovation first or standardization first? Huh?
Well, I think that's two very different cultures. Healthcare is not IT. When I hear IT, I think of Google and I think of Apple and I think of the words fail fast. Healthcare do not fail at all, ever. And that's a very big cultural clash. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think a healthcare person would say we need the security first and the innovation second, but that's not the IT person in me.
I think the consumerism of healthcare is going to drive it. People are shopping now. People have a higher deductible than they've ever had before, and that's deductible, again, getting back to incentives, it's the deductibles that are driving consumerism to shop, okay, to shop for the best or the cheapest MRI, the quality being the same. So I think that's going to drive standardization. It's going to drive, listen, we got to get together because I'm treating this patient at the Cleveland Clinic, but I'm getting an MRI from, Lorain, Ohio, or whatever, And so these standardizations of sharing that data is going to be driven by consumerism of healthcare.
Agreed.
Yeah. I would say, go ahead, Al.
No, I totally agree that the consumer empowerment is our next aspect of personal connected health is really what that is. It's personal, it's being connected to all these different systems, and it's all your healthcare information. So the patient portal is definitely going to evolve. But the challenge now is giving the patient the responsibility for accumulating and assimilating and centralizing and storing and, of course, providing access to all that information. So that technology is still evolving along the way.
But the policy has to come from Washington, D.C.
So I would say that there's enough policy. We know about, there's thousands and thousands of pages of not just HIPAA, but high-tech and all kinds of other standards and how to encrypt and how good enough and all the rest. There's enough of that to make this work. If we just look at the past 10 years, I'd say we're in the teenage transition. We will actually get here in the not too distant future. And the reason is, before we needed processing power, we've got it everywhere now. Before we needed strong networks, everywhere. Everywhere, everybody's got at least LTE everywhere and Wi-Fi and everything else. So the connectivity is there, right? We didn't have that 5 years ago, right? Now regulation, there's enough, right? There's enough regulation. How permissions ought to work. Enough people understand how that ought to work to make it happen. There's enough companies like DataMotion or Verizon or others that'll just provide the infrastructure and say, dump your stuff on top of it, and we'll take care of the HIPAA part, at least for transition. We'll get it connected to the other EMR. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of the business associate agreement between you and that other guy, because otherwise you'd have to do that, and that's too hard. So I'll just deal that, for you. There's enough service companies that can do enough of what needs to be done. There's enough of all the basic pieces are there. There's enough how data structure ought to work and enough collection devices to make good, meaningful progress. So now we've moved to a different phase, and that phase, I think, boils down to wild ease of use, not just a little ease of use. This sort of get people out of the way. And I don't know the word for, I hate to use the word Uber, unfortunately is not a word we can use anymore, but Uber ease of use.
Ubiquitous.
If we didn't have a company named that and we could still use it as an adjective, that's the thing, right? The super ease of use. Wildly better and not way easier than an iPhone or whatever. We need ease of use. We need what I call ubiquity, which means the ability to do the same thing everywhere. right? It just needs to be able to work everywhere. And I think these big infrastructures that the big companies and little and startups and others are working on, including mine, that those things are going to be enough to, so that people can put together the APIs, the programming interfaces from Google to get a map, and from DataMotion to get a secure message, and from Verizon to get secure storage, and from other people to make these things happen. And all of a sudden they need to layer their little bit on top, which is their cool added value that makes the kid or the pregnant mom or whatever say, geez, this is easy, right? And so I think we're at that stage where we add ubiquity, we add we add the
interoperability.
Super ease of use, and the interoperability. I think interoperability standards are good enough. HIMSS has spent decades doing this stuff.
And they're still evolving,
right?
as you
Yeah,
know.
they're evolving, but they're good
technology
enough. They're good enough to
absolutely.
actually make all this stuff work.
Absolutely.
What do you guys think about responsibility of data control? So in other words,
Give it to
we're
the
giving,
patient.
well, yes, but the patient may not totally understand the implications of that. I thought about, you said Google Maps, and that's what made me think of this, is I give away data about myself constantly.
Yeah.
I'm telling people where I am, not on purpose. I'm not one of those people who check in everywhere, but I'm using my app to get someplace. Somebody's got all this information. Someone's getting all this health information about me now, and they know how healthy or unhealthy I am. And how do I know that the information I gave to such and such a company isn't going to be somehow secondarily collected, maybe not sold, but collected by another insurance company who now directs a premium towards me that's slightly different than what it might have been?
Right.
On the pendulum of how strong privacy and security is, you said it half an hour ago, we're way towards infringingly in the way, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's roughly good. That means you can trust that the data is overprotected, and that it's that your identity is removed from whatever data is used by an insurance company and all that stuff. I personally think we've gone too far with that, but at this stage, that's good.
Although, as we have said before, we keep returning to these ubiquitous technologies like the Fitbit. It's only a matter of time before that's interacting with my Wi-Fi connected pacemaker or my insulin pump or my these sorts of things. And right now I actually met with one of the founders of Fitbit, who insisted repeatedly throughout our conversation that they were not a medical device.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
They
because
have
if
to be
they are, they have an
regulated.
FDA problem.
Right.
Exactly.
And even a good company would be 3 years and 8,000 pages of work to get
And
that
a couple
to be.
$100 million.
Yes.
Of course. So that is the teenage zone that we're in right now. This
Right.
is the transition. And I wonder whether we're developing these technologies that are going to insist on paper with their teams of lawyers that they're not in fact medical devices, but in fact they're collecting and aggregating an extraordinary amount of information.
It's certainly a fine line, absolutely.
And on that front, the FDA hasn't gone far enough in. They announced something a year ago that it was now revolutionary. We've made just the basic stuff simple, and they can get on with it.
The
And
guidelines.
at the time, I had just Cleared a medical device.
To stimulate innovation.
Yeah, but and it's still way too hard to Fitbit shouldn't be a problem, and it should never be a problem. But the fact that they have to spend 12 lawyers and 1,000 hours, defending that they're not a device, and not going the way of 23andMe, and
Right.
Getting sucked out of business for a while, and changing their entire model.
But I can foresee the FDA, much like they do the cosmetic industry and the cosmeceutical industry and the nutrition industry, getting involved in this.
Yeah.
Because there is data collected that deals with healthcare.
Exactly.
So there's going to be, I think, a sub-panel, just like the cosmetic
But there
industry.
again, we're way over the line. I
Yeah.
built a product that I just wanted to give patients their own data. So this was the product. Give patients their own data. This became cleared. I got it cleared. But in the way of getting it cleared, I wanted to take their glucose data, put it in the cloud, and give it back to them. Pretty simple, right? Over time, give you your history, give you some other things. When it was over a couple of hundred, glucose value is supposed to be about 100, plus or minus a little bit, 120, maybe 80, good, less than 50, seriously bad, more than 200, really bad, right? So I said, listen, if their glucose value is 300, I'm making it red. This was part of the thing, right? The color of the number is red. The FDA said, sorry, you can't make that determination. That's a doctor to determine. I said, no, the ADA and every medical journal on the planet agrees that a glucose of 300 is red. There is no dispute about this. There is not one in a million people who would say that's not red. And so why on earth because that's for a doctor to decide.
Well, you take that one step farther and you
So we made it black.
Equip this technology with when somebody's glucose level hits 300, then their doctor gets a text message or something.
Yeah, but that doesn't work either. You can't, if you take the average diabetic patient, I said averaged, please, people are going to get upset at me. The average diabetic patient has glucose over 300 every week.
Right. So the way that
that's almost 20% of every adult in America. So we'll do the math. It's not possible. Messages.
But Peter, I think this is a new world that we're getting into, and just like any other new entity, I think there's going to be a light touch of skepticism.
Yeah.
And I think the FDA always has a heavy touch of skepticism.
Yeah.
And I bet you they're going to look at these wearable electronics a little harder, even if they're sport related, or we're doing with concussion or whatever. They're going to look at it. They're going to look at it because even though you're saying it's not diagnostic, it will imply diagnosis.
Sure.
So.
I want to open it up to questions I think we have time for maybe 2. If there's any from the crowd, let me. Actually,
she's going to take the walk.
I'm going to go for a walk. Yeah.
Can anybody do the Jeopardy tune while we're doing the walk?
Oh, actually, you can just read it at the microphone there. Yeah, that's probably best.
We did all know she didn't jump down.
Yeah, I would have if I wasn't wearing a skirt.
Hello, I'm Lauren Anthus. I'm a public policy fellow at the Center for Community Solutions. We focus in on health and human services, been around for 100 years, and I focus in on Medicaid specifically, which might be the largest set of insurance data that exists. So I have sort of a 2-part question. The first part question is, do wearables eliminate the need for insurance companies? And how do you prevent discrimination in the context of wearables or this collection of data, especially with populations in poverty, folks who might be disabled or who might have other things factoring into their health, like social determinants? You mentioned diabetes, for example. The recent census data shows that someone making under $15,000 a year has twice the likelihood of type 2 diabetes as someone making $30,000 a year. So my concern from a policy perspective is that you start mandating something like the wearing of Fitbit as an element of eligibility. Mm-hmm. So your thoughts and ideas around this, not only with insurance, but with discrimination.
I'll just take a quick answer to that because I'm not the best guy to answer that, but I will tell you, I just saw this week that there is an insurance company that is going to subsidize usage of the Apple Watch for their customers. Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting step in the direction.
I think you're going to find it much like car insurance, where, as you know, Progressive or whatever, you plug this thing in and you'll watch how your kids drive and everything like that. So there may be some discounts. And there's a company actually here in Northeast Ohio called Bravo Wellness that deals with incentivizing, and they go out for companies based on, how do you control the 80% of illness which is caused by your lifestyle. So how do you, again, behavioral technology, controlling lifestyle, getting discounts and deductibles. I think you're going to see that happen.
Yep, agreed. That's motivating.
That's
incentive.
Everything in life, from brushing your teeth to combing your hair.
The underlying problem we have, and I think almost everybody in health technology knows this. This is the sort of back-end discussion. I know you know this, but the underlying problem we have is that health itself, healthcare, is not a typical market. We don't have incentives in the market for people to seek the lowest cost at the best value. And there's all kinds of reasons we don't do that. Sometimes there's lots of reasons it's hard to do that. But in the end, it's not easy for me to pick a different doctor based on price or a different procedure based on price or even to find the MRI. When I was at Verizon, we discovered in the counties that had over half of the Verizon employees, the average cost of an MRI for the same MRI with the same quality was either $400 or $4,000. Right. And all we wanted to do, the only thing we wanted to do was tell our employees, if you get it in the ones that are in the lower half of that cost, I'll give you a $100 bill. And if you get it in the price that are Above that, you don't get the $100 bill, right?
Yeah.
And we had a really hard time making that minor incentive happen. And the reasons were, there are a dozen problems with making that go. So just making the markets work like a market is the key underpinning to make this work. And it is hard, but that's the clear stuff that we got to do. We got to make it possible for people to buy lots of insurance online, not one choice, but lots of choices, right? And understand if they do that, what they just did.
Yeah.
But this technology, I mean, to piggyback on this question, it does seem to. It has the potential to create a tiered system of insurance, where those people who have these social indicators that show that they will be the most risky would cost the most. So that would have to, to speak to Frank's point, that would have to be regulated from Washington D.C. if not on a state level.
But the other example that is important there is if we actually find things that actually do reduce selective diabetes. There isn't any study that shows that Fitbit makes diabetes better, right? There should be, at some point there will be, but right now it's not clear enough that there's a really direct link towards lower cost if you do these three things, right? We can see A1C changes, we can see other things, but those are indicators of improvement. They don't actually prove improvement. And to the extent that this data starts to come together and becomes obvious that if you do A, B, and C, the cost goes down, then we will pay for A, B, and C for all those indigent people making less than $15,000. We'll gladly give it away, right, to make it happen, because it will save money and improve their quality. Sorry?
And save lives.
Yes,
I think it's the one place where we will not accept if I'm buying clothes, I'll buy a shirt from Target, and maybe I'll buy a very special dress from Neiman Marcus, but that doesn't happen in healthcare. Right? Everything's the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
Every place I go has to be Neiman Marcus, but I only want to pay Target prices for it. So there's this inherent discrimination in having less money that's going to happen no matter what, and we're trying to minimize that, and that's what you're talking about. But is it going to be eliminated? I'm not sure.
Do you have a question?
I'd like to ask you to comment on access to care. We have a lot of population data that seems to be urban in this country, and not a lot of global population data, particularly in those countries where we're not able to get large cohorts together. So far, it would seem that healthcare IT has not yet increased access to quality care or to care, particularly in rural areas, and even in urban areas where we have isolated pockets. So can you comment on how you would use IT to increase access?
Thanks, Barb. Good question, especially here in our fine city. So one of the ways is reducing the cost of the internet to these certain populations. And I know there's a couple of organizations that have special programs based basically, I think, on zip codes where access is provided, because they've done a lot of studies and they have discovered that a lot of people have phones, but they're not connected. And so providing them access is really one of the key ways, and that extends globally, of course, to the third world countries, which are just finally getting better health care thanks to telehealth and telemedicine opportunities for the first time. So providing access is really one of those ways, and of course the devices themselves. So.
I think there's a lot of places that are doing telemedicine now. Even our small group, with our larger parents involved, we take very specialized neonatologists and we transmit via telecommunications, so video Skype type technology, to much smaller hospitals that don't have neonatal intensive care units or have sick babies. We do diagnostic capability for them there. We tell them whether or not a patient can be evacuated to our hospital safely or not, and whether or not they even need to be. There's a lot of access that many of these people who would only be able to get to a hospital close by to them are getting from these larger, more urban centers. And even within the city themselves, all of our hospital systems, including Inova, has smaller community hospital offshoots like Cleveland Clinic does. And those smaller community hospitals don't have all the infrastructure that the mothership may have, and we beam all that data out to them so that they can get the expertise.
So I would say that the telehealth that we just heard about is working, but as a market share from a business person, it's like 1%, right?
Yeah.
It is provably workable. I work with Avera Health in South Dakota, who has 200 hospitals doing what you described. It's the biggest telehealth system on the planet. It's working exceedingly well, but nobody's ever heard of it unless you live in South Dakota and North Dakota and Wyoming. There's two values of health information technology. I described the lower cost, better quality, and a new kind of science in the beginning, but there's two fundamental values. One is lower cost, and therefore more efficiency, and therefore the ability to theoretically bend the cost curve and improve quality and all the rest. The other one is transformational. The other one is change the way healthcare is delivered. And what you just said is the transformational part of it. To the extent that those people can be addressed where they are without leaving their living rooms, without having to find a way to get to the... Half of the reason my patients at Metro were in trouble was they had trouble getting the mile to the doctor. Yeah. It's a mile. It wasn't a big deal, but it was still a problem.
That's why the access is so critical.
And to the extent that we provide telehealth right into the home or other transformational things, all of which is right at the edge of working at scale, right? So that will happen. We will have health IT that transforms the delivery of care and transforms the methods of delivery, not just transforms the way we're doing it already and reduces the cost.
Well, I think what Peter said is absolutely, it's transformational. I mean, one of the focus strategy of the Cleveland Clinic is access, because access really leads to everything else. And it is transformational in a sense that we're going to have to do something different in the time that we have as healthcare, providers. But the key driver to that is Obamacare. The key driver to that is the changes in reimbursement. Again,
making a market out of this. Yeah.
Right. So it is transformational, and the question is it's a bit of a catch-22. We don't know when to flip on that switch. When is population health going to be fully implemented? We don't know that. Nobody knows that. And so what we have to do is we have one bucket where we're sort of a fee-for-service provider, and we have another bucket we got our foot in that is sort of a population health, driving things towards virtual health care and things like that. So the problem is we don't know when to put our other foot into the one bucket or another, and we're in that sort of catch-22 schizophrenic phase right now. I agree with you.
I wonder if we're in at a precipice where we're going to see doctors, the different tiers of doctors as well, the doctors that interact directly with patients, the ones who are in the operating theater, versus those who spend most of their time looking at melanoma scans. Or
even go to the next level. I think you're going to see healthcare providers change in the sense that mid-level providers, nurse practitioners, physician assistants are going to drive primary care more than physicians. And so
with the help from all the information technology, that's where, people talk about Watson diagnosing things, and every doctor, I'm sure, has the same cringe I do. Doctors don't have troubles diagnosing things, right? It's just not the problem, right? It happens. But it's a rare thing. We go to grand rounds. This is the, once a month or whatever, we go to grand rounds to hear about the tough to diagnose case for the entire facility. The whole of the clinic or whatever had those tough things. Diagnosis is relatively easy in the head of a doctor, even with the poor information exchanges and things we have. What we have trouble with is doing something with that information and distributing it, making it work throughout their system, and making the care team coordinate care, and making the patient's own care circle deal with that information, and making it all work well enough so that people have a delightful experience, and so that costs go down and quality goes up.
Getting back to your point, though, it's going to be to the top of licensure, again, then that's going to have to change, which will be policy either state-driven or nationally driven. So what a nurse is allowed to do legally is this much. It's going to have to go to that level.
Yeah.
And mid-level providers from here to there. So there's not going to be enough physicians, especially primary caregivers, to take care of the boomers generation, okay? And there's not probably going to be enough nurses. So that top of licensure is going to have to change, where they're going to have to do more with the amount of education and amount of training that they have.
In technology, we call that a managed service. And all consultants in technology related, since we've had technology, so a couple hundred years, but certainly since we've had information technology, consultancies turned into managed services and then into software. So doctors and nurse practitioners are fundamentally consultants. And when we add Watson and all the other health technology and WebMD and everything else that should be in that mix,
Tools.
then we can take a fewer doctors and nurses and leverage the technologies to cover bigger populations with better answers.
Yep.
And that's a managed service. And we're at that place now, right?
A prime example is at the Cleveland Clinic now, mid-level providers in the ER system actually is a larger number than the physicians. And within my institute, we had 2 or 3 mid-level providers. We have over 20 now.
Okay.
So that is going to be the change in the future of healthcare, in addition to how technology adapts to that.
John, did you have something to add to that?
No, I thought that was well said. Yeah.
So one of the questions I had there, and I got the time a little bit wrong, so we have a few more minutes.
More questions.
Yeah, more questions.
Come on,
that
step
anyone
up.
has.
Step right up.
Please. And in the meantime, I just wanted to ask, I wanted to seed it for future about accountability there. You know, if you have nurse practitioners relying on information technology to do diagnoses, how does that change accountability?
Well, with IBM Watson, and the concept is all of the information that is present inside this supercomputer, as you mentioned, is able to come up with a diagnosis, or 2 or 3, with a certain confidence level, right? So you're at 80%. You know, I think it might be this at 80%, but this one might be at 65. And so doctor...
And that one will kill you.
Yeah, right. Doctor, here's what I think.
Right.
Take it from here, please. But the interesting thing about Watson is it'll say, you know, if you ask this question and this question, I can get you to 95%, which is really interesting. Yeah. And I think that's where the mobile device, talking to the IBM Watson, really gets interesting, that kind of approach. So,
I want to.
By the way, nurse practitioners do a better job of procedural practice than doctors do. Nurse practitioners and physician assistants do a better job of having a care model or a care delivery mechanism where we go through those 7 questions and act on the results of those questions. What we all call, you know, evidence-based healthcare.
Yeah.
They're willing to follow the rules and the evidence because it's just a different culture and it works.
yeah.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, so I'm the director of our innovation team. So I'm on the computer geek side, not on the physician side. And my question is really around kind of the discussion of Watson and things like that. We've created tools specifically at our facilities around sepsis. We've created these tools. We've proven that they've worked. We did a month-long pilot project. And the key to that was having a human being. We had a pharmacy tech in the ED. And as the system would recognize that a patient had sepsis, they would go to the physician and say, what antibiotic would you like me to help you get started? We proved it. We cut our sepsis mortality in half during that month.
Boy, have I seen those cases.
But
Why did you need them to ask that? Why couldn't the system tell you the antibiotic too?
well, and that feeds into my problem. Once we finished the pilot project and the tech went away, the system remains in place, and the system is currently still telling the physicians this patient has sepsis. The issue we're having is that our physicians, even seeing this, are under the impression that they know better.
Yeah.
This patient doesn't have sepsis because I say so. This is a end-stage renal disease patient. I'm not going to give them fluids, even though all the science says give them the fluids, dialyze it off later, you know, deal with the gunshot wound, not the sore that they have. How do we get the physicians on board? Because I feel like y'all are in the minority, people who embrace technology.
No, doctors are over-alerted. That's why she started by saying,
totally
I hate
agree
the
with that.
EMR.
Yeah.
Right? Because one of the things that doctors hate about the EMR is the stupid alerts, right? It's like you hate the stupid phone calls.
The barrage
You
of
quit
alerts.
answering the phone. If 9 out of 10 calls are telemarketers and idiots trying to sell you something you don't want, or whatever, you quit answering the phone. And the same exact thing happens in the EMR. So yet another alert pops up. Of course I know that warfarin and ibuprofen shouldn't be used together. For God's sakes, who doesn't know that? I don't need that alert.
Yeah.
right? And the fact that I say, don't tell me that one again, is not something these systems allow.
Well, it's
right?
like a navigation system too. I mean, not every navigation system is equal. And you put in your destination and you say, it tells you to go this way, and that's a good way, and it'll work. But you know that you'll shave off like 30 seconds if you go the other way, or you know you don't have to stop at stoplights and you don't want to, so you're going to go this other direction. But the system is still right. But we don't know, as a physician and on the front line, we don't know what kind of data is being inputted. We don't understand how to trust that data. And what have we been trained to do in medical school and all this time is to look at what the raw data is to understand what the outcome is. We don't trust a research paper unless we can review what goes into it.
I love your problem, though. I'd love to talk to you later about it, because because you're right. You know, I've been an ER doctor most of my life, and I've been an internist the rest of it, and I could tell you 20 stories that your system would have solved, and ones that just tore our hearts out. You know, young people with sepsis that shouldn't have it because their spleen was missing, and nobody knew it, but the system knew it, right? and they were going to die soon. This is easy stuff if you know a few things. Yeah.
Change is difficult.
Trust
Okay,
is difficult.
and sometimes it has to come top down.
A louder alert, bigger. Put sirens on that baby.
Yeah.
This is the real alert.
Yeah, right.
Electronic medical records is a fine example. That's a top-down approach.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do.
The people
and
on
you're
the
gonna
next
learn how
panel,
to
half
do
of
it.
them are pilots.
And we're still
Ask
working on
them,
it.
because you know in the cockpit you want you know it's called the master alarm. You saw it in Apollo 13. You want the master alarm, but you really only want the master alarm when there's something to master alarm about.
You know what's funny? What just happened? Speaking of alerts, I heard this a couple beeps in the audience here. Did anybody else get a time to breathe on their Apple phone or watch?
I did.
You did too? 10:40 exactly.
Mine
Isn't
told me
that
to stand
interesting?
What
Because
is-
I heard a beep, and
what
it
is
was
time to
and then I
breathe?
heard it in the audience too. Exactly that. It just my Apple Watch said time to breathe. So there you have that consumer behavior modification,
It's
motivation.
behavioral
Lean back.
technology.
Yeah,
you
lean
have to,
But
you have
that's
to
an
figure out a
alert,
way
so,
to
you know?
engage these physicians
Yeah.
to use that, and sometimes it's going to be top down.
The chief medical officer of your facility ought to put his foot down or her foot down and make it into a red alert.
Yeah, we're an interesting facility in that our physicians don't work for us, so
It's true for
that's
most.
always a challenge.
You
right?
have to incentivize them to use
Yeah.
it somehow.
Yeah.
There's with the alert of it's time to
Embarrassment
breathe.
works.
It's actually
Time to stop.
it is actually time to stop. And I want to just end with each of you, starting with Dr. Pape, to give just one tweet-length idea of where you think we're going, where
of
you
all,
think we'll be 10 years from now.
Twitter's going out of business, I heard, so somebody's going to buy them out. So, you know, where we're going, I think, you know, the technology will continue to evolve. And again, not to harp on it for the last time, but I think we have to incentivize the end users. And how do you engage and incentivize the end user is going to be the key behind that, whether it's top-down, financial incentives, name whatever you want, personal incentives, time savings, you know, that is the trick. That is the magic. And if there's a way with your new startups that you're able to do that, I think you're going to garner a market very quickly.
Dr. Daner?
I was trying to count characters in my head.
You're not going to do it 128.
Is it 140?
Yeah, whatever. They've waived that for you.
Oh, very good. I'm going to try to say it as short as I can. I think patient empowerment and preserving humanity as easily as possible.
Oh, I can't get to tweet
That's
length.
nice. That's
I think that is actually a tweet. That's good.
Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. I'm all about providing, and my Data Motion and Health Accelerator are both organized around getting the ease and the ubiquity working for everything we talked about today. And so to the extent that we can get some of that pervasive ease and ubiquity for all of these sort of ideas and remove the problems of security and all the rest and interoperability, you know, there will be something to hang your hat on and accelerate with.
You had a great phrase before, too. I think wildly easy to use.
Yeah, I couldn't use that ooh word.
Yeah.
I think
John?
building on all of this, since you said 10 years, that's a long time.
10
So
years is
I'm
a
going
long
to assume that the motivation and the consumer this becomes the norm So on your mobile device, whatever that looks like in 10 years, it's pretty exciting. It will be the norm, like using email, like using anything on your device. You will be managing your healthcare. It'll be secure. It'll be comprehensive in that all your information that you need and want to share with everybody, like I was.
And it'll get out of your way.
Yeah.
Because most
That's
people
right.
are people, not patients,
Yeah.
for 99.9993% of their hours.
Yeah, and the
Right.
relationship with the doctor-patient relationship is going to change for the better, as far as more time being spent and more consulting.
Human to human.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, with that, thank you so much, all of you, for coming. And it was just a pleasure hearing you talk to each other and getting to ask you questions. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Welcome.